Welcome to the Simple Minds podcast, where six mates unpack three topics over a new drink each week. Fuck it, just go with that. We'll fix it if it's...
Welcome to the Simple Minds podcast. I'm Conrad Francis and I'm your host today. I wasn't here last week, I don't think.
No, you were not.
I don't know where I am. But anyway,
top my intro from last week.
Glad to be back in the proximity of these four younger men, and one lovely lady, Steph. Hi guys.
Hello.
We've got. We'll finish with Matt because I've got a story for Matt.
Woohoo!
G'day, Jacob.
How's it going?
How are you, buddy?
Very well.
Life's good.
Yeah. Getting pumped?
Getting pumped, or you are pumped? Oh, you got a game. That's why you're getting pumped.
Yeah, building myself up.
I thought you get pumped in the office. Justin Bourne.
What's up?
How are you, buddy?
Great.
Nice hairstyle.
Thanks.
Again, nice little segue to where we're going to end these introductions. That's pretty stylish, though.
Thanks.
Any real reason why you changed your haircut?
No, it's not changed. Same.
It looks different.
Maybe a slight difference.
What's the slight difference? Length on top?
A little bit
hanging down.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Michael can't comment on haircuts.
I can. I had my haircut today.
Did he? He had his hair cut.
Just the one.
The one. How are you, mate?
I'm good, thank you.
Quite shiny.
It's been a good day. Been a good week.
Day? Good week?
Good week. Productive.
Great. Good word.
Productive. I like it. That's my word for the day.
Matt J. Hannum. How are you, mate?
Conrad Swaggy CEA Francis.
Matt J. Hannum. He introduces himself as Matt J. Hannum. Did you see that? Did you always notice that? Why was that?
Because I had to add a little bit of extra
Branding.
I watched him introduce himself today, and it was actually quite impressive.
Thank you. There's another Matt Hannum out there, and he's got a rig. He's got a rig, and he's an Instagram model. He operates in a different reality and world to me. So the J is my differentiator.
Well, hang on. Actually, that's the best segue you've just given me into a bit of information I came across 2 weeks ago when I was at a 50th birthday barbecue, sitting down talking to a lawyer friend of mine, and said, "How do you know Matt Hannum?" And I said, "Oh, he's just a mate of mine, and we catch up, we talk business, and we podcast together." He goes, "Yeah, did you know he had a fashion consultant? He had a stylist. Is that true, Matt?"
It is true.
I knew this.
You knew this? I didn't know this. I'm sitting there pissing myself laughing. Hannum, you had a stylist. Why? Why did you need a stylist?
Look, stylist is one piece of the equation. I had a consultant. She became a good friend of mine who went through a series of. There was, I think, one session and catch up was style on the end, but basically it was repositioning.
Not how I was told, but keep going.
Sure, it was a 6-session type sort of program or protocol around repositioning everything that I did.
Yep.
For what I was doing, the projects I was working on.
Because you were a property developer back in those days.
I was, so to look the part, it involved everything I changed at the time on LinkedIn, the whole lot. So it was a professional image program, effectively, that I went through, and off the back of that was style. And the answer for me is wear black and grey and blue, and that's it.
Well, whoever that stylist was, you want to give them a shout out? Are they still in the business?
I do. Natasha DiCiano. She's not in the business. She's in the business of property development now.
She failed. He's still wearing blacks and blues.
Although I have no idea who you're talking about then.
We'll come back to that off air. But
if it wasn't her.
It was actually quite funny because I'm just sitting there enjoying this Sunday afternoon barbecue, and then this topic comes up and I really just started laughing. But anyway, great to know these little tidbits of information. People want to confess to me. Degrees of separation, probably 0 right now.
We'll fill in the story.
Hey? No, that's fine. That's all I just wanted to acknowledge.
I like the idea.
You really? Well, what do you need a stylist for? You're pretty stylish.
It's a personal brand.
Well, brand, you don't have to think about it. It's one less thing to think about. If you're
just wear black, mate, like you just said, black or blue.
If you don't have time. I like the idea. If I could afford it, I'd probably do it.
Oh, you can afford it. It wasn't that much, and no, it's not about.
I actually know how much it was.
Fair enough.
My lawyer released some information to you. It wasn't that big a transaction, trust me.
No, it would have made him jealous.
Made him jealous.
He goes, "Why didn't I just do that?" I said, "Because you clearly have no style." But anyway,
this could be a podcast in itself.
Anyway, I've been sitting on this for about 2 weeks, so thanks for letting me get it off my chest. We are drinking today. Before we get on to the topic, we are drinking today 2 types of ginger beer. I don't mind ginger beer. I mean, it's a warm, balmy Friday afternoon. So this one is called Raw Jamaican, product of Jamaica, alcoholic ginger beer, and it's made with real ginger. So if we can cheers to this, then we can open the topic up.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Spicy.
Oh, it's Jamaican, man. Hey, cheers, bro. Cheers, Steph.
Well, that is spicy.
Oh, it's not bad.
Oh,
Got a good.
Good.
Get that. Put some hairs on
You
your
get
head,
this from
Mike.
Jamaica?
I think I have to go back for a haircut tomorrow.
Hey. A few weeks back, we attempted to talk about masculinity, and it's a topic I think I really want to come back to at a future point in time. But this topic that we're going to talk about today was introduced to me via one of our listeners, and one of our listeners, and one of my mates of mine, Renee Blethen. So shout out to Renee. She's given me a ton of stuff to circulate with you guys, but this is probably one of the most interesting ones because I think it still touches on an element of masculinity that I believe every one of us probably have some level of understanding with or exposure to. Okay, and she introduces the topic of shame as Brené Brown puts it in her TED talk, because we all know Brené as the queen of vulnerability, and how she opens topics about being vulnerable for growth and all of those types of things. But in this TED talk, she talks about the backbone of vulnerability is overcoming shame or dealing with shame. And it goes for about, look, the usual TED Talk's 18 minutes, 19 minutes, and it goes for about that period of time. It takes a little while to get into the issue of shame in men. And she talks about a quote by, or is it a quote or even a mini speech by Theodore Roosevelt called The Man in the Arena, which is a fairly reflective quote, and I won't go into it word for word verbatim on here, but hopefully we'll post it in the podcast notes or in the blog and talk to it. But gentlemen, I guess from about the 1526 mark or thereabouts, she starts to introduce the topic of shame in men, and I guess shame with me sits fairly front of mind. Some of us here, and I know I do, I use a tool on a daily basis called the Enneagram to help me learn about me. And the Enneagram has a feeling center matrix, which deals with anger, shame, and thinking, largely the spheres that you spend a lot of time in. And I'm an 8, and my base level emotion, it sits in an anger or rage perspective. But when I grow, I take on the strengths of what they would call a number 2, and the number 2 sits in the shame space. So to take on the good parts of a 2, I have to deal with shame. And it's been something, I guess, a big part of my life, growing up as a migrant to this country, having to deal with the cultural differences, the physical differences, and just the basic acceptance that a person goes through to be able to be competent in being themselves. And that's a daily thing these days for me, right? And I think for a few of us here, we work on ourselves daily. I guess, without me going to too much of my story right now, how did this story resonate with you, and where did you go to when you were listening to this, and how she's framed shame? Has it showed up in your lives, and how have you dealt with it? Is it fair, or is it too personal?
No, I can start. I don't want to dig too much deeper into it because we covered it a couple of weeks ago, but you guys all know that maybe 5-6 weeks ago, before the football season started, I kind of almost quit the sport. And having put a post up publicly in the group, in the team's page, highlighting some of the reasons why I wanted to quit, and then having changed my mind and continued with the team, there's still a little bit of, it's less and less now as I get to know the team better, but there was very much for the first few training sessions, especially for the first couple of games, a feeling of, I guess, and it was very probably me and not really anyone else, but a feeling of shame that I was the one that almost quit. I was the one that couldn't hack it, who wasn't tough enough, wasn't strong enough, was kind of gave into the fear and was almost willing to kind of throw in the towel. I'm sitting with it a lot better now, and as I get more and more confident and more comfortable in my role and how I fit into the team, a lot of that's starting to dissipate. But I know initially there was a big feeling of, I guess, shame around that.
She talks about shame, guys, and she uses the phrase, shame is when we use the word I am versus guilt versus using the phrase I made. Justin, I think you were just nodding at me just then. How does that resonate with you?
Well, I don't know if have we done Brené Brown yet? She's phenomenal.
Yeah,
I
love her. I'm still chasing a coffee with her in New York every time I go there.
I listened to her audiobook, The Power of Vulnerability, and I recommend it highly. And I think it's amazing. She talks about obviously shame and guilt, and I think what was interesting is that she talked about how much of an epidemic shame is, and in society. And I've actually had a couple of conversations this week about shame, or not maybe shame itself, but I guess vulnerability.
Yep.
And being
Well,
vulnerable.
if you're talking vulnerable, you are talking shame, right?
Yeah.
That's what she's trying to get the point of. That's where her biggest work was done before she went to vulnerability.
And so, how she said that we both men and women experience shame, but it's organized by gender.
Yeah.
And for males in particular, it's the most amount of shame comes from not being able to be perceived as weak. So being vulnerable and always having to be strong. And I think what's interesting is, when you're, say, running a business or leadership or being looked up to, you're always fighting this battle. And then she talked about this interesting thing where, you're coming back to the arena. A lot of 99% of the time, we either feel like, we're our worst critics, and our self-talk is the worst. So a lot of the shame comes from ourselves as well. Yep. And we're either not good enough, or we feel like we're an imposter. Who are we? Who are we to do this? Or who are we to do that? And I've definitely felt those, feelings over the last couple of weeks in particular, in the last few months. And we've talked about imposter syndrome. And I definitely step between those two states, or I would say states, but thought process quite often. It's either, I'm not good enough, or I haven't set myself I've set myself a standard and I'm not achieving it, and then I'm hard on myself. Or if I'm doing something good, who am I? Why should I be doing this? I don't deserve this, or those type of things. So, but I've definitely learned to become more vulnerable in the last couple of years. But yeah, I think shame and guilt is interesting, and I think it's trying to know the difference between the two.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting to play with that. Renee, the person who put the topic to us, goes on to state that she's intrigued by the pressure on men to be both vulnerable, sensitive, understanding, and then show their strength, courage, and support to keep the household together. I mean, household, business, community, right? I mean, because that seems to be where men have been. And there's been a very big push in the world, and not unwelcomingly in relation to the championing of women in society. But, could it be said that we've done it to the detriment of males? Matt, Michael?
Yeah, I mean, to answer that, yes, in a way. I feel like it's quite okay for a woman to behave as a woman and behave as a man would in many ways. And as a man, there's still much of an expectation for us to operate in that space where we can, whether it's fearless or this or that or whatever our expectation is, that we won't necessarily show too much emotion in the frame. We won't, I think that's the items mentioned were to conform, men need to show emotional control, primacy of work, pursuit of status, and violence. And that's typically how we would see men.
That's how we're framed, right?
That's how we're framed. But then there's this like a push for us to be and show more feminine sides and other aspects and be more vulnerable. But then I don't know that it's necessarily tolerated.
Or welcomed, yeah.
Or welcomed. And so if we circle back to how this podcast started, and you essentially almost tried to shame me for using and quote unquote image consultant for a session, what you were trying to achieve there is to show that, hang on, that in your view, without explanation, fell outside the box of those 4 things.
No, I just want to see your reaction.
No, but that's what he did. So that's what I'm just putting it, because that's standard. That's whether you call that locker room talk or whatever you want to say. Hang on, that seems like it might have fallen away from or be slightly outside that scope. We better find out about it. So then the point is, I think what the challenge is when you get called on something. If you're going to break outside of a stereotype in business, in life, and whatever it is, when you get called on it, are you going to be vulnerable and take control of that decision you've made and use that and step forward, or will you allow that to weaken you?
Yep.
And I think that's where most of the question mark lies here, because roll back to Eminem style, and he got out there and unleashed every possible piece of information about him, so no, he couldn't be attacked in his rap battle. If you do that and you give out all the ammunition and you're not worried about receiving it back, you're fine.
And that's where it comes down to your sort of how you take, that's not criticism, but how you take comments about your masculinity or whatever. Do you let it offend you, or do you just let it wash off and get on with it? Like, stop being a sort of, I don't know, just move on with it. Like, don't take.
You sound like you're going to say little bitch.
Yeah, yeah, you were. I was going to say like a tropical flower or something. But you know,
I want to hear little bitch in the accent. Can you use little bitch?
You little bitch. Talking straight to you, Conrad. But I think, you know, there's biology in this.
Of course there is. There's inherent deep biology. You're exactly right.
Which we can't go past. And I think that's the part that's grating against it, I think. But
doesn't that show up? Well, fuck. It shows up in my life all the fucking time.
I was going to say, where does it show up?
It shows up in my life everywhere.
Yep.
And, you know, it's a constant battle. I'm going to ask you guys, when's the last time you cried?
Usually.
Really cried about something that was meaningful to you? Really? You do it in commercials?
Hey, I'm a dad. You're a dad now. It's funny how...
What do you mean now? I've been a dad for 18 years, man.
So you've been a dad for most of your life.
But not tearing up, because like you're talking real
Yeah,
hard
real
out.
cry.
Or I did it within this year.
Yeah?
Yep.
You want to share what got you there?
I don't even know what overcome me. And I don't recall crying like that for a long time. So I'm 28. So this would have happened maybe earlier this year. And it was around a situation with my wife.
Yep.
There's always a battle, I think, when I guess, which is those conformities a little bit of, I guess what you learn from your father, and we've talked about a few of these things in the podcast before, of like, you want to be the breadwinner, you want to do good, and then obviously I've got ambition as well drilled into me, so I'm always kind of striving to achieve, and I enjoy my work. So one of the big challenges always is, for me, I'm maybe working too much, and I don't see it as being an issue, but when we come back to the love languages, my wife is quality time, QT time. So what happened was, I guess in short, I let her down.
Yep.
And I guess I felt, I guess it would have just come straight from shame.
Yep.
And just let it all out. And it was probably more the space of, it started with, I made a mistake. That's where it started. And then for whatever reason, it just overcome. And like, I was literally on a, sitting, kind of curled up literally in a ball against the wall. Just, I don't know what it was. And then my wife, who was angry at me to start with at the beginning, was just like, I don't know, taken back. And we sat there and kind of worked through it. And I just really felt like I guess it was shame that because of the relationship that I was having wasn't what I guess wanted.
So this didn't happen when you were by yourself, sort of thinking
No.
This happened with your wife.
Yeah. So, and obviously I felt better after that. And I've been close to, probably not full-blown crying, but getting close to a couple times. And I think the pressure of building a business, and I'm very grateful that I can have my wife and share that with her. And I guess I don't feel judged from her to let that out, as I've probably been extremely beneficial for me. And I think a lot of men would not do that at all, and or would bottle it up, or I guess it's why men's suicide rates are so high and things like
just
that.
on that, I was going to say, male suicide rates are below the age of 35. 65% of suicides are men.
And a lot of the conversations is that I have it, or we have, is just it's that locker room culture as well, where I guess so many people are insecure with who they are. They have the need to just go, oh yeah, bro, well, they know you do that chick and fucking yeah, mate, and like it's all just all this and anything that's too much of you're a pussy or a little bitch.
Or a tropical flower.
It's not tolerated. And so the guys who want to open up don't, because then they feel like they're going to be condemned. But the irony or the hypocrisy is probably all, say there's a group of guys, they're probably all feeling the same things.
But I think
they just don't want to talk about it because of that, kind of, again.
And I think you can use both to release, because you're saying there's that pressure that builds up.
But that's emotional intelligence, isn't it, Michael?
So you can use that manly sort of boyish locker room stuff to release that, but control it.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, because the next question I was going to pose is, this is almost counterintuitive to stoicism.
Yes. As in shame itself?
Shame itself is almost...
I don't know. I see. Because an interesting thing with shame is shame can actually be used as a tool. It is used as a tool. Without shame, you're out of control, yeah? Without shame, you don't stop. Yeah, of course. If you do an action that is stupid, is actually stupid and immature and dangerous, if you don't feel some shame after that, you do it again and it gets worse. You do it again and it gets worse.
She does talk about people that don't have shame, and she says
you have to have shame.
No. She goes to experience zero shame, you have zero empathy, and I know zero empathetic people.
That's what I mean. So kind of deep. Well, little things during the day, little bits of shame, that warm feeling she talks about.
But don't confuse guilt with shame.
No, shame. I'm talking about an action that you've taken. I think it is a useful, not a tool that you use.
So I'll challenge you on that. I may is guilt. Yeah. I am is shame.
Because sometimes you got to be, and you got to know. I think that's the key as well. Is those situations is knowing when it is shame or guilt. Because guilt is different. She actually mentions that guilt is the positive. It's the inverse correlation of shame. So shame, she talks about, leads to addiction, abuse,
if it goes beyond
all these other things. And guilt is the inverse of that. So she actually talks about having guilt and measuring it against who you want to be is one of the most powerful tools that you can do, which is acknowledging your mistakes and going, how can I learn from these and how can I adapt? It's uncomfortable as hell because you've got to face who you are in the mirror, which comes back, I guess, to that self-love acceptance piece. But if you can get into that space, that's where it's guilt. Shame is like, I'm never.
Stops you getting
shame
there.
is I'm never good enough. I'm never this. I'm.
That can still be released through an action or something like that. It's still internal shame. Like you're saying, guilt is about
shame is all internal.
Yeah.
Whereas guilt is largely action based.
Yep. Okay.
There's an interesting point. She says that empathy is the antidote to shame. And I think, especially with a lot of this locker room talk, men in business, there's always that feeling of kind of having to put on that bravado and that everything's right. And when people ask, how's business? You go, it's great. However, if you're willing to be the first person to say, no, I'm actually struggling a little bit. There's a bill that's due that's stressing me out, or I'm a little bit worried about this game tonight because I'm underprepared, or it's just that feeling of empathy is what starts to dissolve and break down that shame. And that's a really big piece that I found, is that as soon as I started to talk to more people in business like Justin, like you guys, that are having the exact same experiences, the more I talk to people and my teammates about the fear of not being aggressive and the fear of going into danger, they go, yeah, me too. And that's the exact language she says. Me too are the most powerful words for dissolving and breaking down that barrier and starting to kind of eliminate that shame. Because as soon as I spoke to what I perceive to be a big, aggressive, strong man that's on the front line of our team, and he says, oh, the reason I play offense is because I'm not particularly aggressive. I can take tackles and I can protect our quarterback, but I'm not an aggressive person that goes out dishing out violence. And I'm like, okay, now I can empathize and relate to him. And the more and more people, there's obviously a couple of people that just love being aggressive, and that's a great part of their nature. But most people I've spoken to, most business people I've spoken to, are saying that they don't necessarily have that they're struggling, that it's harder than they thought it would be. Once you have those conversations, it makes a big difference.
What was funny in her book, she actually talks about we wear the
power of vulnerability, not
power,
greatly.
Yes,
the new one
the power of vulnerability, where we all put on this suit of armor, before we go out for the day, before we leave home. So we put this armor on and we go out and we fight, and then the armor becomes so hard to take off in the evenings. You just leave it on, and it just wears you down. And like letting off the armor and being vulnerable is the power of kind of moving forward. But also like the point of that as well. We all strive for perfection. I'll wait until I've got my armor looking glistening or ready to go before I enter the world, which loops all the way back to the start, where she says about that quote of the admiration should be the person in the arena. And she referenced it back to the TED Talks himself. Yeah. She goes, everyone expects you to rock up to be, she said, TED's the biggest failure conference.
Well, failure conference, yeah. It is, isn't it? Because that's what people have learned.
Yeah, but people expect to go to the conference, listen to a speaker who's perfect, yet every speaker has failed and goes up there being vulnerable. And what she said is that's actually what we want.
Bless you, Matt, Joe.
We prepare ourselves to be perfect. We wait for that thing. Bless.
Someone's allergic to the topic.
Yeah. Oi. And we wait and we wait and we wait, but it's never going to be perfect. It's getting into the arena and playing and giving it a go.
She talks about courage being used probably incorrectly, because obviously weakness is what attaches to shame, and to combat shame, you need to be courageous, and then with courage you overcome your vulnerability. So have we used the word courage incorrectly for too long?
What do you mean?
Well, we talk about courage when it describes bravery.
Yes.
Okay, but yet.
But I think it takes
courage. Isn't it
it
brave to cry if you're a man instead of being weak?
Yeah. So I would agree that courage. It takes courage to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
And that's actually where we talked about it in a book that I recently listened to on my travels, was the book of the courage to be happy. It actually takes courage to be
Courage
happy.
to be disliked?
Courage to be disliked. But it also goes on to make the same statement that it takes courage to be happy, because being vulnerable, Brené actually talks about wholehearted living. You've actually got to be vulnerable to be wholehearted. And so it's kind of like this catch-22, that if you put on this facade of not being weak and trying to be strong and live up to these expectations, you'll never be happy.
It's a real balancing act.
Oh, it's massive. I mean,
because you'll never be happy.
And so let's just understand where we are right now as individuals, right? Are we strong enough? Are we in that space where we are? And she talks about, you got to dance with the one that brung you. All right, I love that quote. I mean, that's
in her Texan accent.
You got to dance with the one that brung you. And I mean, I've been talking a large part of this week, but a large part of all the things I talk about is about acceptance of self.
Yep.
All right. No, can we all here put our hands on our heart and say we've truly accepted ourselves?
I wouldn't say truly. I'm much better at it. I always hid a lot of emotion. I mean, as a kid growing up, our family weren't big talkers about emotion. We didn't really chat about deeper topics. And that sort of come out with my kids a little bit. I'm a lot deeper than I was with my mum and dad.
Do you reckon you've gone the other extent of deep with your kids, or you reckon...
Maybe, but they just shame me. Why are you meditating, Dad? God, dear me. But yeah, I think I think I am much better at it now, which is helping me be more vulnerable with my kids and whatever. But definitely growing up, I didn't have... I mean, my dad was a dad, and he's a great dad, loving dad, did lots of things together, played sport together, but we didn't have what I would say like manly chats, or he wasn't mucking about. He's not very good at anything, sort of anything mechanical. And I'm talking about tying shoelaces as well. An absolutely amazing man, but there was a lack there. Although it's interesting because my stepdad, my mum got married in 86 or so to Don, who was like he was worked for Shell, was like this manly man, hairy chest, lotuses, and so it's a real interest. And I lived with him for the last sort of.
What do you mean lotuses? What is that?
Cars and stuff like that. He had heaps of
Thinking
different
manly man with lotuses being the flower.
tropical flowers. Yeah,
Kind of like Conrad in the late 80s.
yeah. But yeah, he was a real manly man. Traveled the world from Africa, grew up in Africa and stuff like that. So it was a real interesting sort of polarization between my dad he left when I was 8 or 9, and then Don, who came in. So I sort of got a little bit of that last bit from Don, I suppose. So yeah, I definitely need to work on opening up a little bit more, I think. But I'm better at it.
Yeah,
I'm
cool.
better at it.
Matt, since you went out sneezing,
Yeah.
allergic to the topic.
Apologies for my allergy to the topic, or possibly the genuine Jamaican.
Pretty good.
bottle.
I'm actually liking this.
I'm
Beautiful.
really
It could be the
enjoying
pepper in
loving
it.
the
It's got
spice.
like this peppery sort
Yeah,
of
it possibly
taste.
is. But look, no, I don't think I could comfortably say that. Look, I 100% accept myself. I think I've done a lot of work on that. Surprisingly or otherwise, putting yourself a little bit more in the public eye, even on social media, podcasting.
Well, you've done a
other
lot lately.
I've done a lot lately, and that is
and
as a big part of
be brutal with this, right? I'm asking you to be really, really open, right?
It's really quite confronting, and I think
Has any of the comments or interactions challenged you to the point where it moved or even stirred your emotions?
absolutely all the time. I mean,
Sorry, I don't mean to do them all the time, but did any of my comments annoy you?
I don't think you've commented negatively very much at all, from what I can remember.
Very much.
I've got a few aliases, bro.
Yeah, I know. Well, we've given you many of them, but you have to set up accounts, and you're a bit lazy for that. So I think that's a really good challenge, and if people want to try a challenge, I mean, putting some content out. I mean, you talk about standing in front of the mirror and looking at yourself, and I think when you're throwing yourself out there on social profiles, and whether it's in an audible format like this or video format, it's quite confronting because we have this balance between, I guess, the 1 or 2 or 3 stereotypes of who we sort of believe we fit into, and then us. And somewhere on that spectrum is the reality. And I think if you're not sort of cementing or profiling or setting in stone any real data, then you've got nothing to compare. Like if you don't go and watch a video of yourself, you're only presenting in your brain what you believe is the case, not necessarily the truth. So you're only fooling yourself. You're not fooling everyone else. You're only fooling yourself. So going and putting a lot more content online is very confronting. And it's something that it's one of the reasons why it's so easy to go on social and post things. And it's one thing to put it out there in front of a few friends, and it's another thing to start to get it to push more publicly. And I've had all sorts of comments back, whether it's personal judgments on how I look, or just that you're a fool, or sometimes they have put some thought into it. Sometimes they're just straight up trolls who are just whatever, something hit their page and they're commenting on it. But it's a real challenge. And I think that last, let's call it 12 to 24 months of me doing a lot more content has been a quite powerful, I guess, tool and process for me having far more self-acceptance.
How did your self-acceptance go through one of the biggest, I guess, probably exercises that you've done this year with your event a couple of weeks ago? Are you happy to entertain some of those thoughts?
Yeah, so look, we ran an event with a series of speakers, and I was one of them, and many of the speakers were, I guess I would quote-unquote call them professional, and I have spoken a little bit, but I wouldn't consider myself at that standpoint. Yet it was a big thing. There was a lot of my self attached to that. I was in front of a few hundred people, or a couple of hundred people, and I hadn't even necessarily prepared. But I had to accept that, and I had to accept that I was going to put forward the best performance, I guess, that I could at the time, and that's what I did. And if I tie that back to a lot of my early years, and from 15 I was playing in bands, and I was regularly, after period of time, and certainly my early 20s in front of a couple of thousand people at a time or more. And that's very different in a sense when you're hiding behind a guitar or otherwise, when you're hiding behind a collective group of musicians making, some art, I guess, in that way, compared to just you standing on stage all by yourself, presenting your information, how you want to present it. And so all those things. So speaking live, podcasting, videos, vlogs, posting, even just writing detailed posts and commentary, I found it quite liberating in terms of working towards a much higher level of self-acceptance. But like Mike said, I don't know that you can ever say, yes, I fully, completely accept myself, and it never changed. Like, I've got to that level, that's it.
So Brené goes on to say, you show me a woman who can sit with a man in real vulnerability and fear, and I'll show you a woman who has done incredible work. She also goes on to say that you show me a man who can sit with a woman who has just had it and can't do any more, and his first response is not, I unloaded the dishwasher, but he really listens. I will show you a man who's done a lot of work. Where do you guys put yourselves in that space?
That part of the talk that she gave is interesting because she's really defined the traditional female-male role.
Well, this is what she's saying, because she's very obvious with what she says. Shame is organised by gender.
Yeah. But she's sort of defined it as the housewife and the male worker as the.
I don't know whether she's done that. I mean, I think she's used a situational scenario, but
she sort of talks about the male being fear-based, weakness-based shame, and the woman being more just having not to look flustered, not to look as if she's out of control, which I think. We all have all of them, I think, in parts. But I don't think we're just purely defined by that. I think we have shame exactly like that as well, like incompetence or...
I don't know. I mean, I think Brené's got it on the head, because a lot of the females in and around my life, there's always a common thread around the shame piece and the vulnerability piece, which is around... perfection, competence. So it's almost like it is an element of weakness, depending on how, I guess, defined. Whether you want to get really like cutting hairs on that, because there's an element of weak, but that's just vulnerability, right? But for men, it is about the margin. Like, there is a clear. The females, that's not so much about. It's those other elements, and it's always an underlying thread. They're never good enough. That's what they feel like. They're never happy with their image. They don't do enough, and all of these things. It's always the common kind of underlying things, or that from my experience.
Here's the real question, right? If you guys failed, and we've played with this topic a bit at 7am Brekkie Club, right? About the next 12 months, okay? If you failed, where does that put you? In your household, within yourself, where would that put you?
For me, especially being the sole financial provider for the family, I'm in a very traditional position at the moment where I am the sole breadwinner. Ainsley's a stay-at-home mum and will be for the foreseeable future. So there's a big feeling of, I guess, pressure to continue providing that, to continue growing, to provide her with a lifestyle and not in a.
But Jacob, you've written us an amazing piece, right? Which I can't thank you enough for. Reading the negatives, how does that make you feel?
It invokes a lot of, if I read all the negatives, especially the ones about failure and the fear of not living up to expectations, if I try and really internalize that, I guess there's a feeling of shame around that, where if the business failed, if I didn't live up to those internal expectations, if I wasn't able to provide for my family, that there'd be a massive feeling of
Have
shame.
you shared that with Ainsley? That piece?
No.
Are you prepared to?
Yeah.
Because I think shame has an underlying power that we don't admit to, right? And I was moved by your piece, significantly, both ends, all right? So it's powerful, man, all right? And to overcome shame, you've got, like anything, you've really got to fucking play with it, right? Instead of dancing around it.
I think Brené touched on that, right? You got to head straight into it.
Yeah.
You got to acknowledge it, and you've got to work, straight through it. And
Yeah, 100%. Because fear is not fucking real, right? And neither is shame. Is only much as reality attached to shame as you want to give it. And I felt the shame in that. I feel much the same way with a lot of things, mate. You know, I mean, since my dad passed away, I feel very responsible for my mum. Right? I don't generally give myself a lot of space to fail. You know, because and you know, the byproduct of that is me playing on a very, very tight rope of, you know, what I have to do. So I really align with what you wrote, and I get it, and I understand it, and I'll hold you accountable to it because I don't want you to fail. Yeah. But you need to share that with Ainsley.
Yeah, I do. It comes back to a common thread we've had in several of the last podcasts. Is just communication is not. Men feel like we need to internalize and maintain and hold our fears and like be strong and not share that with the world. But when you don't communicate with your partner, when you don't communicate with your kids, when you don't communicate with your employees, your friends, your community, that's when these things
that's that build-up of pressure that Justin talked about.
Yeah. And that's going to come out you fucking fail.
It's going to come out somewhere, yeah.
Hannah, let's go here with you, right? Because we know when you cried last.
When?
When you were in my office.
Oh God, no! I probably cried since then. No.
Well, I know when I saw you cry.
I'm going to go somewhere else.
All right.
I'm going to go to my mid-20s, and where I just worked. I guess had just
pause. Can we start the matzos?
Of course, we're going to move to a second drink.
We're going to go have a matzo ginger beer.
Let me pause this impressively amazing content to refresh ourselves with a new beverage of ginger beer. We're going to Matzo's. It's a broom-based beer. Why am I hosting this at the moment? Anyway, so in my mid-20s, and I just wanted to touch on that communication thing. The other side of that communication, they also need to be ready for it.
I don't know if anyone's going to be ready, bro.
No, they're not. But what I'm saying is, okay, don't expect them to be.
Interesting.
If you need to communicate something, you don't need to communicate it. But in my mid-20s, I think I'd probably got myself overworked. I went through, effectively, I got ill. I had a flu for about 6 or 8 weeks. I was a young, fit, healthy guy. I had a good career, and all of a sudden,
nice style.
I didn't have any style yet. Didn't have any style yet.
Oh, sorry.
This is why you needed the style.
I was still watching like 90s basketball films with Conrad in them, wearing short. Somewhere between Conrad and David Hasselhoff in the 90s was probably who I was modeling.
Josh is going to have fun with that.
Oh, shit.
That was the idea. I can see a GIF right there. But no, look. Anyway, so the point being, I actually got myself into a space of chronic fatigue. I had a lot of mental fatigue. I developed significant anxiety, and I'd never really experienced any anxiety or anything in my life. I got into what I would consider a fairly light version of depression. Like I was never in a space where I felt like I could take my own life or anything like that, which I'm very fortunate because I know a lot of people get to a point where they feel that. But I was effectively a shadow zombie floating around for nearly 2 years. And I had to start trying to find a way to communicate and find other people that had been through things similar. And I really struggled. The majority of people, their immediate blowback, whether they were tight family or just friends or otherwise, is that, no, like just get on with it. They find it very difficult to accept that deeper level of communication that you're trying to come with. And I just wanted to raise that point as well, because I think the communication is super important. And if you want to communicate that out, definitely do it, but don't expect your level of awareness and the amount of work that you've done easily caught by the person you're trying to communicate that with.
Yeah, I'm not talking about expectation here. I'm just talking about straight communication.
Yeah, and you've got to be ready for whatever comes from that open communication as well.
That's sure.
You've got to be ready for that.
That's vulnerability, right?
Yeah, but I think Matt does raise a super valid point, and it depends on your environment and proximity, because Brené actually acknowledges that. When she talks about doing the work, that's what she's talking about. So, I guess that's why we have things like Lifeline and things like that as well, because some people don't know. They probably are trying to communicate it in the best way they know how at that point in time. Because remember, even think about all of us 24 months ago, we'd be in a very different space, both awareness and the way we would communicate outwards than where we are today. And so most people, I can correlate to that. And I think that's super important to add, or from my point of view anyway, because even if your wife, let's say you were, high school sweethearts and you've grown a lot and you've done all this and all that and you start opening up and sharing, but she was, for whatever reason, like that macho thing, and then there's this conflict, then it's not going to help anyway. So, sometimes I think it can be in a tricky... you both have to do the work, really.
You do, but I don't think you can be responsible for anybody else other than yourself.
No, I never said that. So I agree with that too. You can't... I think that's what Matt's trying to say. You just can't expect someone else to receive it and or have the empathy,
but as this bloke
to relate back to you,
as this guy that she was talking to or came and approached her, saying that my wife and girls got that book, but they won't let me. I'm not allowed to fail in their space. That's real, right? I've had a few failed businesses. I've had a few failed relationships. I've failed enough fucking times in my life to know what it feels like to be at the bottom. And Matt, so have you, right? So I get your story, right? Which is why I know you would struggle with shame, right?
Definitely.
And like similar to me, so from an Enneagram perspective, you head to a 3 or a 4.
Well, I'm 6. So what is it?
So that comes from shame.
Yeah, which makes sense. So as I don't improve, I can let go of a lot of shame, and I definitely feel that. And if I was to gauge myself at the moment, I'm in a good space where I'm heading out of that. But if I sort of retract back to the core of where I can be at times, there can be a lot of shame there.
And just for everybody else, we've referenced the Enneagram here. The Enneagram is an ancient profiling tool which was put together by the ancient Sufis over about 2,000 years ago. And if you really want to have a look at it, I would strongly encourage you going to the EnneagramInstitute.com and having a look at the information on there. But it's probably been one of my biggest growth tools in understanding anger, shame, and where I love hiding was where I like to think a lot. And so there's the three areas of baseline emotions and spaces where you spend your time in. Guys, I guess I don't even know how long we've gone for.
10 minutes.
Really?
No, a few minutes.
It is a big topic. It is a big topic, and it's a constant battle for me. So when Brené brought this up, and I listened to it, and I sat with it, I had to digest a bit, and I didn't want to make this all about me, but this is a big topic for me, and I think it is for most men if they're prepared to admit to it.
Well, coming down to the Simple Minds podcast, that's helped, I think, a lot in us being able to open up on a public platform. I think you were talking about that before.
I think it's enabled us to be vulnerable, but has it enabled us to deal with our shame? And I'm not sure you can deal with that publicly.
Yep. Specific, like deeper things in your life. That
I think shame is a very personal thing, and it's a very personal journey. It can be publicly acknowledged, but I don't know whether it can be publicly dealt with.
What do you think about shame being not a tool, but an emotion that helps you through something because you feel something about something? Can it then?
Everything can be a reference point. Can you
learn from it? I suppose
everything can be a reference point, and I think if understanding where shame fits in the personal growth, position, and that being one of the anchoring thoughts as to where Brené comes from, of course it can be a reference point.
Are you asking more, can shame serve you?
Yeah.
Because we talked about whether ego can serve you. Can shame serve you?
It all serves you.
And we've discussed ego.
Everything
we know
can serve you, but you've got to actually know.
Control it.
So, a gun could serve you, right? But it doesn't serve you if you use it the wrong way.
I think shame can serve you as a brake pedal, as it'll stop you spiraling too far out of control. In that, like she says, that shame is very strongly correlated with violence, aggression, addiction, depression, bullying, suicide.
I think I've done all of those apart from suicide.
There's a lot of those things, and I think, but it can also, like you were saying before as an example, like if you're having a big night and you're drinking a few beers and your partner perceives you to be kind of not holding your liquor very well, then if you've got a feeling of shame, it might stop you from doing it again. It might stop that spiraling too far out of control. That shame isn't necessarily a good thing. It's something you definitely need to work through, but it can, from a positive perspective, can stop you from, I guess, letting it go too far?
I think because if you had no shame, you're out of control. There's nothing to stop you feeling any emotion or.
But I think as well, like the Brené talks about the antidote to shame is empathy, but no one can empathize with you if you don't share, which comes back to vulnerability. So it also starts with just being vulnerable to start with, finding the right space to be vulnerable, and don't bottle it up. And
then going down the fucking wormhole.
Yeah, because the moment you share, say, how you're feeling, and someone goes, "Me too," the shame almost disappears because you're kind of then. You don't, because again, Brené defines shame as "I'm sorry, I'm a mistake," or "I'm sorry, that's a mistake." So you flip it to guilt. The moment you can share that experience with someone, you just both feel guilty about that situation instead of shameful of that situation.
Yeah, because I think guilt can drive action. I just feel like shame is. I can, even if I went back to some of my failures, like you talk about, Conrad, I think the guilt can drive the shame. The shame has no business, and has no. I can't see how you can use that as fuel.
But didn't you just say that shame leads to guilt? That shame is part of that guilt process.
I'm making complete assumptions here of my interpretations, but in terms of that, if Brené is saying empathy is the antidote to shame, no one can empathize with you if you don't share how you're feeling, which is then being vulnerable. But then the moment you are vulnerable and someone's empathizing, because typically empathizing is me too. Oh, you've been through that. I don't feel like I don't now feel ashamed of that thing because you've felt it. Now it's more, you can start to then flip it into guilt. Oh, we both made that mistake. Remember, that mistake is guilt. I am a mistake is shame.
I don't think that's guilt.
No, that's how
Brené frames it.
That's how it's framed.
That's how it's framed. So there was that situation that we feel guilty about because, we should have done that or did this or that was that. And then you can start working through it. And guilt, which is why I believe, she's researched this, 12 years? Yeah. And that was in 2000.
She spent 6 years on shame alone.
That was 2012, this TED Talk is. So now it's, 18. So that's 18 years on researching this topic.
And this is
it's correlated outwards. So I think guilt is definitely powerful. I feel guilty a lot of times.
I think we all feel
Describe feeling guilty then to me.
Guilty is, you guilty is like...
lack of?
No, maybe lack sometimes. Or say I think guilty is, as a leader, you've got to call people out on their stuff as well, and then how they react, you feel guilty about it.
Guilt tends to be an action, whereas shame is a feeling.
Like, I made that mistake, or that was a mistake. I feel guilty because of the concept. But you know what? I can learn from it. And guilt is kind of, I guess, that... Guilt is interesting because guilt is action-based. 5149 is actually making other people feel guilty as well. So out of guilt, they take action because they feel you've given a lot of value, so they feel guilty. That's the only reason they take action. So I don't know. I'm kind of leaning towards where Matt's going. I don't know whether shame can ever serve you. Unless you walk through it and can acknowledge it, it never serves you.
I think at the highest level it can. I think, at the very low levels, it's going to be the biggest anchor to you or the biggest lead in your fucking pockets that you'll ever see.
Bigger than ego.
Bigger than ego. Once you can acknowledge something, once you can accept what's playing out, then you've got the chance to use it, all right, and use it as a reference point more importantly. It's not, again, it exists, right? We can't ignore it.
The only way I can see it being serving you is you getting so ashamed that you then have to be vulnerable.
Yep.
Which then that's what Brené Brown talks about. Because she doesn't talk about she doesn't talk that you never feel shame.
Shame is in everyone.
Exactly. So
shame is one of the, and this is the thing, guys.
But if you hang on to it for too long,
but it's still serving you though. The emotion is there.
Not if it's serving you.
The original sin as depicted in the Bible is based on shame.
Doing that. It's not serving you if you're sitting in shame, being violent, aggressive, addicted,
but you're now talking about
bullying.
You're talking about that extreme part of it. So shame
sitting in shame does that too. That's what Brené says.
Yeah. But you still have shame. Shame still on a smaller level that gets you, and you take action on it. Okay, you feel the guilt, then you move forward.
But the reality is, guys, shame will never disappear.
I don't agree.
Shame never
disappears. That's what I'm saying.
If you think about it through the lens of
saying sitting in shame won't serve you.
Yes.
That's what I'm...
Yeah. An example I was using before of someone who if you have a few drinks and you get a little bit over the top and you have some embarrassing incidents.
Did this happen recently to you? That's the second time.
When he got his touchdown.
You can feel guilty about that and the impact it had on your friends, family, and surroundings, and take action to not do it again. Or you can kind of feel a sense of shame, like
You've let yourself
maybe that's who I am. That's what will lead to binge drinking again, and then I feel really this is who I am now. And
But
that's
you see the difference? Guilt is about others. Shame is about self.
yeah. I think in that scenario, shame is going to lead you down a negative spiral towards it getting worse and worse, and becoming, I guess, alcoholic in that example. Guilt will very quickly reverse and turn around. I think that's the difference between they're two very similar feelings and kind of emotions.
Any emotion that you let out of control, happiness, right? You let that go out of control, you keep going with that, you're going to go fucking crazy. Yeah? So that's what I'm saying, that you're talking about levels of things pushing through. Yeah.
I'd love to be happy out of control.
All the time? Nah, never going to happen.
Yeah.
You'd be happy, Smurf.
Euphoric.
Do you understand, though, what I'm sort of...
Clearly I know, because I want to be happy all the time.
You can't be happy all the time,
happy
Connor.
right
This
now,
is
Mike?
what we're saying. You can't. Well, I'm saying, anyway, you guys obviously can be happy as much as you want. But and we
Mr.
talked
Happy.
about this, the yin-yang, the black, the white, there always
What
has to be...
gives you happiness is the yin and the yang. Why can't you be happy all the time?
It's just not happiness then, is it? Because happiness
not?
comes from being from somewhere to somewhere.
No, happiness is a state.
Yeah,
Happiness
which
is
you've
a
come
state.
from something. And
No, happiness is a choice. You can choose the state.
Yeah.
Happiness
So you choose it. So there's two
Not
things. What are you
ACT.
choosing? Yeah,
That's a whole
you
other
understand
topic.
what I'm saying?
Anyway, gentlemen, thanks for being open with me. Thanks for being vulnerable. Interesting topic, eh?
Thanks for being happy.
Good topic. I mean, it was tricky. I think we sort of struggled to navigate it a little bit, but no, it was good.
Well, there's been enough shame in this group for that we've seen from time that we just had to get there and be open enough to get there ourselves. So
There's so many different levels. It's so complex. Like it's...
But I think the more you can practice being vulnerable, the better. And like with Matt, kind of doing the social media thing was kind of my tool of also working through it a lot as well over the last kind of 12 months too, and so because it exposes you. You're putting yourself out there to be judged, to be commented on, to do all these things, and so the more and Brené talks about that. You've got to go again. It's the same common thread. You've got to put yourself into the uncomfortable situations and push yourself into the uncomfort. But that is the best place to be. And you've got to keep doing those things. And being vulnerable will be uncomfortable. Showing weakness will be uncomfortable. But as a man, open up and say to your mate. It's the whole thing that it's the "Are you okay?" movement. It's all of those things. Like, find someone who you are close with. We're very lucky and grateful. To be sitting in this room, to even having this conversation, right? And there are a lot of people out there who don't. And I think, if we can encourage anyone to at least
just be a
little bit open, be vulnerable. Start small. Start with something small. Don't just, like as we talked about, like I think with Matt, you just come all blurt it all out. Work up to it. Do the work. Like Brené said, do the work.
And don't use it as a tool. Don't use vulnerability as a manipulative tool, because I think people are starting to use that as a tool. Like, never mention that you're vulnerable when you're telling somebody you're being vulnerable, if you know what I mean. Like, a lot of people, I think, these days are starting to use it.
Double
because
negative?
it's becoming a buzzword, vulnerability. I am... Like,
I'm okay with any of it at the moment. I'd rather go over than under on this topic. So anyone that wants to share on vulnerability,
I'm
go
not
for
saying
it.
don't do it. I'm just saying do it from the heart.
Yeah, but hey, you're going to put caveats on it, people aren't going to do it.
I thought you'd love that. Do it from the heart, Conrad. I thought this was the thing.
All right. In the attempt of being vulnerable, we'd love some comments, likes, feedback, shares. As we said, this is a topic that was given to us from a listener and a friend, and I would love to hear from any male or female what their thoughts.
Or non-binary, gender, whatever.
We could do, I guess, we're in one of those communities. But please be vulnerable. Open up to us. We'd love to hear what you think on this topic. It is a big one. I appreciate it. I'm not sure we've done it as much justice as we would like to. And no doubt we'll come back again to haunt us somewhere. And on that note, champagne.
See ya.
See ya.